This straight away from William. What is the latest with John Textor's attempts to buy Everton? Is he serious? And what will this mean for not only Everton, but also Lyon and Crystal Palace? Should we start with Lyon? John?
Yeah, this. I think what we can safely say it's going to mean for Lyon, for Everton, but for a lot of us as well, is just some very bizarre appearances in the media, because John Textor was doing the rounds in the last 24 to 48 hours. I'd call it. There's a very good phrase for it in French. It's called lunaire, which is like basically it's almost so wild. It's like it belongs on the moon, sort of thing. It's just like it's mind blowing. Essentially, a press conference where he was basically going into detail about Lyon's budget over the summer and the transfer dealings, and very clearly illustrating that he doesn't really know how sort of the finances are working behind the scenes at Lyon. And then that was followed up by another bizarre one where he was interviewed on British TV about his efforts to buy Everton. He was talking about the process and how he hopes to have it tied up soon, and likened buying Everton to, one, the opportunity to be the president of the USA, and two, the opportunity to buy the White House. So if nothing else, for Lyon and potentially Everton fans, there's going to be a lot of really interesting media appearances that come out. But in terms of sort of how he's done with Lyon so far, there are major questions about sort of Textor's running of Lyon. And I don't think it's necessarily going to reassure Everton fans some of the stuff that's gone on. The sporting director, David Frio, has basically been suspended after what has clearly been quite a below par summer, based on the fact that Lyon went to the DNCG, so the financial watchdog that controls the budgets of French clubs' accounts for each season, and said that they would sell for around 100 million euros of talent, and about 40 million, if we're being generous, was sold. So there was clearly a big problem with a lot of sort of outgoing transfers. We saw Ryan Cherki sort of being linked with pretty much every club under the sun, and then none of those moves coming through. We saw other players being sort of forced towards transfers away. There was a story, I think, about Ernest Nuamar breaking down in tears during the medical for, I think it was a proposed move to Fulham or something like that, where basically a lot of these players are just being forced towards these moves because of the financial situation that Textor has allowed to happen on his watch at Lyon. So yeah, it's not encouraging if you're an Everton fan, but equally, are there many alternatives at this moment in time, given how long it's taken Everton to find a suitable buyer as well?
I think that's the question. How much worse can it be if you're Everton? And for that reason, I think that's why we've ended up at the situation where Textor is the only show in town, really. He says there's a big difference to how he owns Lyon and how he will own Everton, because Lyon are now under the umbrella of Eagle Football, his multi-club conglomerate, which owns Molenbeek, Botafogo, etc., etc. He says that he will be buying Everton out of his own money and not Eagle's money. Okay, well, you have to ask, without, resource sharing, how deep will the pot be? Is this just hoping to make the most of the increased gate receipts, a bigger, newer stadium when they move from Goodison Park at the end of the season? We'll wait and see. But the thing that concerns me the most as a Lyon sympathiser, I suppose, is the odd-pitch stuff is one thing. And obviously, as JJ says, he's making David Frio carry the can for a poor transfer window where they weren't able to shift that many players. I mean, one of the worst bits of the transfer window was when they ended up paying 31 million for Moussa Niakate. And he said, well, that was my own money, so you don't need to worry about that. I'm not sure the DNCG, the French Financial Control Board, will see it that way. So, it's your money, that's fine then. As JJ says, he has really no idea how it works, and he seems hell-bent on proving that publicly. The thing that concerns me most is what it means for Lyon long-term, because everything that he does with all his different properties within the Eagle Football Galaxy it's all about moving money all the time. And it seems as if cash flow is often a problem. And you look at, for example, the big things that have happened in the Olympique Lyonnais universe outside the team, and that's the sale of the much more successful women's football club to Michel Kang, an investor, and it's the sale of the LDLC arena, the huge state-of-the-art basketball arena that Asvel, the local basketball team, play in, the club that's owned by Tony Parker, dead opposite the Groupama Stadium. And so the whole way that Lyon has been run over the years, even when it ran aground a bit under Jean-Michel Aulas, was about diversifying your revenue streams. And I guess you could look at, say, a Barcelona or a Bayern as an example of how you can do that. But Bayern, obviously, a very successful one. But now it's stuff that he's not interested in. He's just getting rid of to bring money into the football club in a kind of quite hand-to-mouth sort of way. I mean, honestly, it wouldn't shock me if a couple of years down the line, if Lyon ended up back under the control of Jean-Michel Aulas and some investors, because Jean-Michel Aulas and his group are the ones who've bought the basketball arena. So for me, I don't really see what the strategy is with Textor long term. The good news is for Crystal Palace is him buying Everton will mean Crystal Palace a shot of him. And I think one of the big frustrations for Textor is that he owned nearly 45% of the shares and does still, until he sells them, own 45% of the shares in Crystal Palace and has absolutely no influence on the club, which is probably for the best.
From Charles on X, what can we expect from Angel Gomes over the next few years? Has he shown anything while playing for Lille that makes you think he's destined for bigger things?
Yeah, so to see Gomes sort of called up and rewarded for his good form with Lille, with a place in the England setup, I think is quite validating. To me, it's actually quite ironic that Lee Carsley has called him up for England when Carsley was less than enamoured with Balogun's form when he was playing for us, because he considered sort of Ligue 1 to be a bit of an inferior competition in terms of potential call-ups for national team players. So I think that change in scenario, whether it's positionally or whether it's just because he feels that Gomez's form has been so strong, or it's interesting to see these different players who might become important in the years to come. I did note that, but I think Gomes. I think it's been a really eventful start to the season for him. Had a bit of an injury scare very early on, where it looked like he took a very heavy knock and could have been out for an extended period of time, and thankfully there was no serious harm done, so was able to get himself back on the field and to build on what's been a very good spell with Lille so far. He's really impressed me with the kind of profile of player that he is in a Lille team that quite often sort of loses its best parts when sort of the right bidder comes calling. I know that some players have stuck around longer than expected, like Jonathan David, but Gomes, I don't think was, the expectation when he arrived wasn't necessarily that he would develop into being one of the key players in the team. But, when you look at sort of how things have gone the last couple of years, obviously there's big questions over sort of Ben Taleb as well, sort of on the longer term now. Gomes has become this really crucial figure. I know that they brought back Andre Gomes as well, despite having allowed him to leave over the summer. But I think Angel, is good value for the recognition that he's getting for England at the moment. I do hope to see him sort of become a staple for the Three Lions. And it's quite validating as well, I think, for England internationals to be able to sort of play in a league like Ligue 1 and still get called up, rewarded for their good form, because, he has been a very consistent performer for them over the years.
I think we're seeing this more and more, aren't we, really? We're seeing English players who are determined to drive their career where they perceive a lack of opportunity in the Premier League's best clubs and thinking, okay, well, I'll go and make it happen for myself in continental Europe. And we've been able to see that. And I think with Angel Gomes, it was more it's not a Jude Bellingham sort of career plan, or few are, of course, but I think he's used every opportunity he's had really well. So Boavista was very, very productive for him in Portugal, and he was a different kind of player there. He was more of an attacking midfielder, and he's developed into a sort of different role while he's been at Lille. I mean, you could say Angel Gomes is one of the, talking of questionable multi-club owners, although a far worse one. It's one of the few benefits of Lille having had Gerard Lopez in charge that they've ended up with Angel Gomes, because he came over from Boavista when Lopez still was in control of both clubs. And what I like about him is, I think Ligue 1 has really helped him, because he is, in Portugal, he was encouraged to be proactive with the ball, and he has kept that while he's been in France, whilst doing it under far greater physical pressure. And I think for someone of his stature, that is a really big deal to be able to do that. I think even if his career hasn't been planned, and that might not have been the career that he planned when he was in his teens, it's worked out really, really well for him, I think. And the key thing for me about Angel Gomes, I think it was this week, where he said, they asked him, what type of midfielder are you? And he said, well, I'm just a midfielder. I can play any of these roles. If you want me to be a 6, I'm a 6. If you want me to be an 8, I'm an 8. If you want to make me a number 10, like I was some of the time at Boavista, I can be a number 10. So I think that versatility is a direct product of the career path that he's taken, as well as his ability to absorb information and adapt to new coaching and new systems.
This from Ludwig on Instagram. As a Swede, I'm really excited about the potential of Viktor Gyökeres. After scoring 3 goals for the national team this month, I think he could potentially become as good as Zlatan Ibrahimović. Do you agree, Andy?
Well, I think you're helping me here, because I don't know the Swedish for steady on, but you're just about to tell me.
Oh, God, steady on. That's a colloquialism. Vänta en stund. Yeah, that's the best I can do. Wait a moment.
Okay, vänta en stund is what the official OTC position is.
Yes.
Because Ibrahimovic is unmatchable, I think, in terms of talent and in terms of profile. And of course, the thing about Ibrahimovic is the way that he developed, as JJ can tell us in a minute, in his 30s. So the player that you think he is all along changes when he gets deeper and deeper into his 30s, which is the extraordinary thing about Ibrahimovic, like way more important than the headlines and the actual natural raw talent and all that sort of stuff. So we're talking about a monument of not just Swedish but European football, who's incredibly hard to match. Gyökeres, on the other hand, is someone who's not been fated since he was a teenager. He's had quite a difficult route to get here. And everything that he's done in Sporting in the last year and a bit has really, I think, skyrocketed him to this position he is at the moment. Now, I guess partly where Ludwig's coming from is the fact that he's not just a goal scorer. He's a big guy who's got a lot more to him. And we've really, really seen that at Sporting. Someone who can not only stand up to bullying from defenders, and I'm thinking of Pepe, for example, who definitely tried to do that when Sporting played Porto last season and came out of it with his tail between his legs, because Gyökeres was all over him. He was brilliant. He stepped up to every level that he's been challenged to do. He's someone who can be the number 9, who can score goals in the penalty box from further out, who can set his teammates up. There's so much to him. And I think what's so impressive about him is the rate at which he's still improving. There's no sense of this is what Gyökeres is and this is what he's going to be. I look at him now and think, what is he going to be in 2 years? Like, we honestly don't know. And I think from a Swedish perspective, the partnership between him and Isak, admittedly they're in Nations League C, so I think we have to take it with a bit of skepticism, a bit of healthy skepticism. The partnership between these two seems to be working really well, and that is not a given, because I think if you look at, for example, Belgium, they have had for a while 2 of the better strikers in Europe in Romelu Lukaku and Lois Openda, and Domenico Tedesco has never found a way to fit them together. So I think if there's one thing that Jon Dahl Tomasson has done really well so far since he's been in charge of Sweden. He's still only at the beginning. Getting those two to communicate and click together as they have been doing in recent games is a massive, massive boost for the Sweden national team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, sort of on the topic of Zlatan, it's very, I mean, I understand why sort of every attacking talent that comes through the ranks in Sweden gets compared with Zlatan, because he was... he was the superstar of the Swedish game for so long, and naturally because of being two attacking players as well. But I think it's hugely important for Sweden and the national team to move on from sort of the out of Zlatan's shadow, because it feels like even after he'd retired for the second or third time, towards the end of his career, that there was still, all these like calls, like bring him back. And it's felt for a long time that if Sweden is to really get back to being competitive at international level and being one of those tricky sides that nobody wants to come up against in the Euros or a World Cup, that they have to find a way to sort of embrace the fact that Zlatan's no longer around, and they need sort of a more collective approach where they can't rely on sort of his individual brilliance. And when he sort of hit the early part of his 30s playing for PSG, Andy was right. He completely morphed into a different type of player, and we wouldn't have expected that of Zlatan. The age that Gyökeres is now, so we don't know what the future might hold for Gyökeres. But I think Zlatan just became such a complete player. I was lucky enough to see that transformation at PSG. The right way forward, as Andy suggested under Jon Dahl Tomasson, is to sort of pursue this more collective approach where you can get the most out of a number of talented players, as opposed to just relying on one extremely talismanic player in Zlatan, who was talismanic not just for the national team but for all of his club sides as well. And for him to sort of put that on his shoulders and sort of relish that for so long and perform the way that he did was stunning, and you have to take your hats off to it. But he's no longer around. He's not there to sort of bail out Gyökeres or Isak if they don't perform. So finding a way to get those two to fire, two extremely talented attacking players, but also setting up the right kind of team behind them in order to make sure that they get the chances that they need, but also to be tight enough at the back so that they can be a bit more formidable when they come up against European opponents, I think will be a really big test, because there are talented players sort of in the Swedish national team pool at the moment, but it's felt like they were sort of heading towards a low ebb even before sort of Zlatan called it a day. So I think that certainly getting the most out of Gyökeres, but also Isak and other players in the team is going to be crucial, really, if we're going to see Sweden making those appearances at World Cups and Euros again in the future.
No disrespect, Andy, but can you become potentially as good as Zlatan in the Portuguese Primeira Liga?
Well, I think the sense is that he's only stayed because of the way the market is. He's too good almost to get transferred as a centre forward this summer, because he'd be too expensive. Sporting are looking at the thick end of his release clause, so 100 million for him. Ain't no one paying it that for him this summer, particularly a guy who was at Coventry 15 months ago, even if he has done extraordinary things in the months since. So I think, obviously, personally, he's settled off the pitch. He's been asked about it a lot, and he said, well, look, it's no hardship to stay at Sporting, because I love playing for this club, and this club has given me everything. And he kind of has to say that, because no one's taking him on the sort of money that it would take to let him go this summer. So look, maybe the financial picture looks different next year. And if it does, maybe, you're right, I think it'll be very hard for him to prove to the wider world, unless Sporting go and win the Champions League or something crazy like that he belongs in that elite level before he leaves Sporting. But the market conditions mean at the moment that that's not been a possibility. There's no reflection on his ability, I would say.
This from Inigo on email. I really enjoyed last week's discussion on Sevilla. I noticed that Valencia are also struggling and currently sit at the bottom of La Liga. Are they having the same problems as Sevilla? Johnny, you might remember that Andy was talking about Valencia yesterday's OTC because he was suggesting that we watch their game this weekend as his game of the week. Are they suffering the same problems as Sevilla, from what you can understand?
I don't think necessarily that they are. I mean, I think both clubs have illustrious histories to live up to. But Valencia's feels a lot further in the past than Sevilla's because, Sevilla have sort of stayed on, the kind of modern European football radar because of the stunning success that they've enjoyed consistently in the Europa League. Whereas Valencia, they were sort of a name of almost yesteryear. I mean, I remember growing up and Valencia were one of the really big clubs in Spain. So to see where they are now, is pretty sobering. And I think adding an element of weirdness to it is that one of the staples of that team that I remember when I was growing up, Ruben Baraja, is now the coach of Valencia. So it feels it's a really difficult club to read. Obviously, there's a hugely strained relationship between the fan base and the club owner. You only have to look at sort of this summer's transfer dealings to sort of understand why. Getting a big fee for Mamardashvili, knowing that at the end of this season he'll move on and they'll be expected to sort of find a cut price replacement for him, and finding somebody of similar quality on a fraction of the price that they've managed to bank for him, will be difficult, if not impossible. And then you look at some of the other acquisitions. They've already got problems with Rafa Mir because of what's happening off the field. And you look at some of the other stuff that's going on off of the pitch as well. I think they're one of the European clubs that's engaged in this dynamic ticket pricing, which is sure to go down like a lead balloon with the fans. And then you've got the spectre as well of the stadium move, which many people will point to and blame as one of the sources for Valencia's struggles over the years. I don't think it's exclusively, or it can be exclusively chalked up to that, but I do think it does sort of feed into it and play its own role. But many people will have forgotten that Valencia was supposed to move to this new version of the Mestalla years and years ago, over a decade ago now, and work on that stadium, which has almost been sort of like derelict, like a half-built stadium that's just sort of like left there, like this kind of like ghostly, eerie, like throwback to when Valencia were dreaming big and, could have become, really established as one of maybe top 3 or top 4 teams in Spain. And the fact that that's now going to be, re-upped and finally that stadium might get finished, I think just tells a story of, a club that really has fallen from grace over the years. And it's easy to get nostalgic and to think back to sort of the days of guys como Mendieta, Kiri Gonzalez, Ayala, Canizares, guys like that. The Valencia team back in the day was fantastic. But the one that we see now, there's a couple of really, really talented players in there. I think there's the midfielder who got called up by Spain for the UEFA Nations League recently. Is it Pepelu or somebody like that? Andy will probably correct me. But, so there is talent still coming through, as there has been, over the years. Let's not forget, it's a club that launched the likes of David Villa, or helped to launch the likes of David Villa, David Silva, Juan Mata as well. But it just feels like they have never really been able to live up to the heights, that they set when they were sort of Champions League regulars, and really sort of considered one of the strongest teams in Spain. And they feel sort of like a poor relation to their former self, really.
Well, no correction from Andy, so you're in the clear. But for you, Andy, from Carl on X, it's a bit early, but are there any surprise stories in your eyes so far this season, not least with the Bundesliga, where Carl's been really impressed by Heidenheim, who are top of the league with 6 points from 2 games?
That's right. Top for ahead of tonight's trip to Dortmund, if you're listening to this on Friday morning or Friday lunchtime, which, bear in mind, they didn't lose to Dortmund at all last season. They drew with them twice. It's a really interesting fixture and one worth watching. You've got to squeeze an extra game of the week, haven't you, in there? The answer is currywurst, by the way, before you get to it.
Thank you.
And at half-time. And the thing with Heidenheim that's so remarkable is the fact that there are a few remarkable things about them. The headlines being, of course, they've got an incredibly long serving coach in Frank Schmidt, who took over in 2007. Who's taken them up for the fifth tier to the top one. They've qualified for Europe for the first time. They're in the Conference League. They are playing Hearts when we get to November at Tynecastle. So if you're in Scotland or Northern Britain, I'd say they're worth a watch. But the brilliant start to this season has come after, inevitably, for a club of this size, they lost their three best players in the summer. So Tim Kleindienst, their top goal scorer, went to Gladbach. Jan Nicholas Bester, their best player, Bester by name, Bester by nature, went to Benfica. And Aaron Dinci, who will be a fantastic player in the future, has gone to Freiburg. And that's where they're at. You know, they're losing players to sort of second tier kind of teams, with every bit of respect due to Gladbach and Freiburg. So that's been super difficult for them. They've got someone in Paul Vanner, 18 years old, on loan off Bayern, who wants to pick up this creative load. He's been brilliant in early season, scored the goals that got them through the qualifiers in Europe, scored in the early Bundesliga games as well. So whether they can keep going is a good question. Look, if they finish top 10, it will still be an incredible achievement while they're enjoying this European adventure. Of course, the beauty of them being in the Conference League rather than the Europa League is the programme is not quite as heavy. So that makes a difference for them as well. And of course, they'll be playing slightly less high quality teams as well. So worth keeping an eye out for them. And also, while we're on the rest of Europe, we have to give a quick mention to Dender as well. Been promoted to the Belgian top flight for the first time in 15, 16 years. And they're top of the table going into the back of the international break, which is pretty remarkable. They lost their coach, Timmy Simons, in the summer. And it looked like it would be really hard to replace him as well. So early days, but still very impressive.
One thing I wanted to add on Heidenheim, though, I actually think this is one of my favourite parts of the story overall. And it's that they built up, they've been building up their stadium as they've risen through the ranks. And obviously they've managed to sort of acclimatise to the different leagues that they rise up through in terms of what's happening on the pitch. But when you see sort of the stadium like on the TV, it's really funny to remember that this was a stadium that initially, I think it had like a 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 seater, just like one stand, and has now been turned into this stadium that's kind of growing and mirroring their rise up through the ranks. And it's not always the easiest to sort of make look attractive on all of the Bundesliga broadcasts, a little bit like Clermont was when they were in Ligue 1, and you've just see all of this like the renovation going on in the background, and they've covered it up so it looks a little bit, at least a little less of an eyesore. But no, it is a fantastic story for many, many reasons. And you do sort of hope as well that they don't suffer the same issues that Union Berlin did after having a couple of really, really good years and then just finding that step up to continental action a little bit, a bit too much of a challenge, which almost, burned them.
And that's it from us. Thank you for listening to Ask OTC. If you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at Radio Dotun, at Andy Brassel, at John_LeGossip, or at OTC Pod. And you can email us, otc@footballramble.com.